Hello, friends, and welcome to Building at the Edges, a podcast from Seed Club. In this episode, Jess, or that tall guy on the internet, interviews Benny and Jayden from Future Primitive to talk about ERC-6551, a new token standard that enables every NFT to have its own wallet. In this conversation, they break down how an EIP, or Ethereum Improvement Proposal, works, why they chose to identify the Future Primitive brand so heavily with an EIP, and they lay out some interesting use cases for ERC-6551. Stay tuned for interesting takes on the Metaverse, NPCs, digital fashion, and more. Enjoy the show.
All right, gentlemen, welcome to Building at the Edges. You guys are actually truly deeply building at the edges. You're trying to make something brand new come to life. I think if I said to you both privately, I'm curious about it. Maybe not quite skeptical. I'm curious. I am on the exploration journey with, I think, many of our listeners here. So I think this conversation should be fun. Let's start off. You guys are from Future Primitive. What the heck is Future Primitive?
Yeah, so Future Primitive is a on-chain product studio. We launch companies and projects and technologies for decentralized communities. But, to summarize it up, we just like to build at the edge. So that's kind of like our thing. We have a very basic formula, action plus asset. So what kind of actions can you take, like staking or minting, all these things? And then an asset could be digital or physical. And for us, we just imagine all the different permutations that are possible. And through that process, we uncover interesting primitives that we believe could be the future.
So I think most people who are listening to this, they might know you guys from previous work in the NFT space. But right now, the space you're taking up is around this ERC-6551. I should get that in. I know that's a number near and dear to your heart, but all over the internet, pop-ups at NFT NYC. It's interesting to me because I'm seeing that you as a company trying to popularize a new set of functionality that lives on Ethereum. And I think that my natural reaction there is like, what? Normally EIPs are coming, ground up through a community. There's this, long-standing process of which I don't claim to really know the details of. But what I do know is that I haven't seen sort of a company and a brand really identify with an EIP in the way that you guys are, and fairly loudly at the same time. So I'm curious about the strategy and the thought behind doing that.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time building at the edges of NFTs, like thinking about how far can we push this concept of a token? What can NFTs do? What can they be? How can you interact with NFTs? And so a lot of things we built over the past year and a half have been kind of exploring that question, as Benny was mentioning. And what we realized, especially in some of the projects we've been working on most recently, is that kind of the end state of that, the ultimate expression of that, is every NFT actually has its own wallet, because that lets NFTs do anything. It lets them own anything. It lets NFTs participate equally on Ethereum, just like you and I do. And we really think that's kind of like the end state of what NFTs can be. That's what a lot of the things we've been working on have pointed to. When that becomes true, when every NFT has a wallet, there's a lot of really cool possibilities that open up that we've been looking forward to exploring. And so the reason for building this as an EIP rather than just building this as a product or just building it into projects that we build is we think this is really most powerful when it affects every NFT and not just some NFTs. There have been things in the past that have tried to explore this concept of NFTs owning things or NFTs doing things, but they've always been limited. It's always been only some NFTs that get to take advantage of it. And we really think the most powerful version of this is when every NFT has this ability to do things, to own things, to be things. And so that was the reason for going down the route of an EIP. And EIPs are really just kind of community shelling points. It's getting consensus from the community that this is an idea that is worth exploring, worth building on top of. And there have been bits and pieces of what 6551 attempts to get everybody to, kind of coalesce around that have happened, but there hasn't been this community shelling point of everybody can build on top of this common idea of NFTs having wallets. And so that's why we launched this as an EIP, to rally the community around this idea that we think has a lot of power.
I would add to that, I actually think ERC or EIPs to be super awesome. I remember earlier, when me and Jayden were having this conversation, I was like, yo, Jayden, I just bought a 1-800 number, 1888 EIP 6551. And I wanted to make t-shirts of EIP 6551. I want to set up a website. And he's like, yo, this is it's a dev proposal. People don't do that sort of stuff. They don't market it And for me, I'm like, you know what? It's super important. Even though it's kind of funny that it has like a 4-number digit, I think we ended up with a good digit, to be honest, but it goes back to education, right? Abstraction is good, but sometimes the abstraction dilutes the knowledge that needs to be acquired, right? In the early days, I was making t-shirts for ERC-721, and I was like doing the same thing. I was like, 721, that's the number, remember it. And it caused people to read into it, to participate, to be involved, to be open. And somewhere along the line, that is abstracted to NFT. Somewhere along the line, that became something else, and it removed people from the core understanding of like the innovation of like what this is actually trying to do. So that's why we think flying the banners of ERC-6551 or having that 1-800 number is super important, and I think people love it.
So I want to get into the details of what this unlocks, but I want to stay on this topic first because I think it is an interesting business strategy, but I want to dive in a bit deeper. But before we do that, let's just make sure we're defining things clearly for people. So what is an EIP? And then can you just give us the high level of what 6551 does too?
Yeah, for sure. So an EIP is an Ethereum improvement proposal. And Ethereum has this system of kind of bottoms up community-oriented proposals for improving the Ethereum ecosystem. That can look like really kind of low-level core changes to how Ethereum works. And that's actually one of the most common use cases for EIPs is like actually changing the consensus mechanism. But you also have ERCs, which are kind of more high-level like application standards, like ERC-721, where it's like the community rallies around a common standard, a common way to build things. And this process is a way for the Ethereum community to kind of collaborate and build things together and come to consensus and agreement on what patterns should we be building around, what things do we think are important. And I really do think that this is one of the biggest benefits of building in the Ethereum ecosystem is such a robust community-oriented proposal system where anybody can submit an idea, anybody can get feedback, the community can rally around ideas that they think are really important. And so EIPs are just proposals. You write up a document that says, hey, I think this thing should exist. You post it on the ETH Magicians forum and get some feedback on it. Say to the community, hey, I've got this idea for something. I would love some feedback, some thoughts on it, and everybody can comment on it. And then from there, it goes into draft mode. You write it up a little bit more formally, post it on the EIP website through a pull request. And then from draft, it goes in review, where everybody kind of piles on and comments on it and what they like and don't like. And that's where the real kind of consensus building happens. And then it goes to last call, and then it goes to finalize. And so it's this process through which ideas, patterns, ways of building can be agreed upon by the community and built kind of from a bottom-up perspective by the community. It's very similar to RFC processes and things like that outside of the Ethereum community.
Awesome. And so what's the 1 or 2 line descriptor of what 6551 enables?
Yeah, so 6551 gives every NFT a wallet. Every NFT gets a wallet, which means that every NFT can own things. Every NFT can interact with applications. Every NFT can use on-chain protocols so that every NFT can participate on Ethereum.
Awesome. And there's, more to get into there, but I want to go back to this point of like the value and the opportunity of sort of associating the brand of Future Primitive with an EIP. And I'm curious, strategically, what does that get you? Because our listeners are people who are building, interacting within the building side of crypto, Web3. And I think we're highly attuned to new things people are doing to build attention, to build memes, to drive narratives. And what I've seen is you leaning into a narrative machine very heavily. And so help us understand either the business driver there or the strategic value in doing that.
Yeah, Future Primitive has a very simple model. It's a triangle. The thing at the top is consumer experiences, and then the bottom right is tooling, and then the bottom left is primitives. And so that triangle is what we try to like cycle through. We've been operating for 1.5 years, so we've kind of gone through one full loop. We're working on consumer experiences, which includes Staple vs. Sapiens project and BB3. And then through that, we built tooling. We built a lot of token gating tooling, Auth3, all that sorts of stuff. And then the first primitive we've kind of uncovered is 6551. So that brings us back to our natural step is to then initiate the consumer experience, and then that flywheel keeps going, right? So from a business standpoint, for Future Primitive, how we make money or how we plan to make money is to launch top-notch NFT projects that are in the culture space. We want to build virtual cars. We have ideas around fortune telling in Web3. We really want to start a digital film roll company, tarot cards. So we have a bounty of ideas. Some of them are with partners or brands that are abroad that have come to us. Some of it is fully incubated internally. And so the tooling and the primitives actually act as like grease to help us execute on these ideas faster. The alternative to that is we would need to hire a lot of developers, write a lot of custom contracts, and just kind of increase the burn rate, all these things. So actually, by leveraging and working with the community and contributing back, we actually amplify, we get to stay lean, we get to stay creative, we get to ship faster. And that's kind of the reason why 6551 is open source and a standard for everybody to use.
Got it. So there's clearly a flag being waved here that both can attract clients. Maybe what might I do with an NFT that can own other things, but then also there's sort of this accelerant in that, not only do you need to have sort of a standard or that there's a benefit in there being a network of people building these things, we also get folks that are actually building out tools or missing pieces, and probably even coming up with a bunch of use cases that you haven't considered before as well. So there's this rapid iteration and as future primitive kind of being tightly associated with that number, that EIP, in the same way that like it would be very valuable if you were seen as the creator of 721s. And I'm sure many are fighting over that in the history books already. But interesting to see the many knock-on effects that can kind of come from what is like it struck me as unusual. Like, I think my first take on it, and I've come to some of your events and we've obviously had a couple other conversations. It's like, you trying to make something happen. I think that's the Mean Girls quote of like, stop trying to make fetch happen comes up. And I was like, bros, you guys, like, what are you doing here? And I think the reason I've maybe stepped away from that feeling into one where I'm like very curious about the strategy here is because I start to see other people talking about the things that they want to do with it. So it's no longer a thing that, Ben, you throw out some crazy ideas, bro. And some of them like, yeah, okay, cool, I guess. But then some of them are like, yeah, that's interesting. So maybe this is a good time to sort of talk about some of those things, because I think that is what makes it a lot more real. And I want to put two ideas in front of you that I've heard, I guess, be the direct result of your flag waving, tree shaking activities on the internet. Benny likes to use a lot of capital letters sometimes. He's channeling Jason Calacanis, SVB bank run style stuff here. So he's also got, what do we have in the background here? Is this like a marathon?
It's a past recording, but yeah. I
figured. So probably need a whole other podcast to get into the thought behind that. But I think today Parallel came out with a new intention to use 6551 as part of like a game that has a bunch of AI NPC players that are out doing stuff. I saw the tweet thread right before this. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So yeah, maybe if you want to talk about that one specifically or another one, I'd love to get into the next level of detail around how you see people using this new primitive.
Frankly, over the last few days, it's been an explosion of ideas. But I could talk about one that we're working on, and then Jayden can kind of talk about some other ones that we've seen. The one we're working on, which actually kickstarted all of this, is we wanted to do something in digital fashion. This is something that I've been involved in since 2018. I worked with The Fabricant to sell the first digital dress and been following it ever since through Artifact and DressX, all of these other companies. And my thought process was like, hyper-realistic digital clothing is cool, but there's no distribution channel. You still got to use ARKit, SnapKit, or you go into the Metaverse that nobody really hangs out in. We call it an empty world problem. And so the distribution channel that still operates and still works is the profile picture. And so we were like, well, why don't we launch a PFP collection with Jeff Staple and the Stapleverse? And the whole idea is that you can change your outfit, your gear, infinite amount of times. It's fully on chain, it's gasless, and make it so it's a reflection of reality that you can change your clothing like you do every day, hopefully. So that was kind of like the first use case of like digital fashion. A character can own objects, items, gear, outfits, and that extrapolates nicely to like the idea of a decentralized inventory system, which most on-chain games or games needs or requires, right? So that's one big one that we're working on, and I think a lot of people are sharing that. And it's important to know that this decentralized inventory system or the token bound accounts, it could own any token, right? It could own ETH, USDC, it could own meme coins. It could own NFTs, 1155s. If Seed Club launches a new token standard in the next year, we could also hold those tokens as well. So I think that creates a diversity, and like other projects restricted some of these things, but for us it's like you can own anything you want, or the NFT can, right? So I'll pass it on to Jayden.
Yeah, I think a lot of the thinking and a lot of the building we've been doing is around this idea of NFTs as agents, right? NFTs as things that can do things. We've done a lot of experiments. We did an experiment a little while ago where we launched these NFTs where it was a pager, like back in the 90s. And if you owned one of these pager NFTs, you would receive pages every time somebody else who owned a pager sent a page. And you'd be able to send pagers to the network, right? It's kind of experimenting with what if NFTs could talk to each other. And through that, and through Sapiens, and through a lot of the things that we've been building, we've been kind of realized that like NFTs being able to do things is a really important thing. We want to build towards that. So that's kind of a large part of the impetus for building 6551. It's not so much a desire to push anything or to make this happen. We just think that NFTs as wallets, NFTs as agents that can participate on chain unlocks all of these visions we have for really cool things that you can do with tokens. We've got a laundry list of token ideas that we want to build. And 6551 just enables a lot of those. It enables this future we see with NFTs. So inventory is one really interesting use case. Some interesting things around airdrops. And so you can send airdrops to the NFT rather than to the holder of the NFT, which means that each NFT is accumulating its own assets rather than everything being about the owner, right? The focus shifts from the owner of a token to the token itself as its own agent, as its own ability to receive things. Really cool things that we've been thinking about are around DAOs as well. Like, what does it mean for NFTs themselves to be members of a DAO? And that the membership is not so much you as an individual are a member, but that NFT is a member. And that NFT is what interacts with it. And so 6551 is kind of our vision for what NFTs can be, right? And on-chain, the wallet is kind of the universal communication layer. Everything works with wallets. All tokens work with wallets. All dApps work with wallets. Everything just assumes there's a wallet in the mix. And so giving that power to NFTs really lets us build a lot of these cool things we want to see in the space.
Giving that power to NFTs is a thing that I think is maybe difficult for some to wrap their heads around. Obviously, examples are helpful, but just from like a user experience standpoint, can you walk us through what that is like? Like, how am I as a user actually making use of an NFT that actually owns other assets?
Yeah. So a lot of this is still being explored, right? This is still super early. And so consumer experiences are lagging a little bit behind right now. But in terms of the experience we've been building with Sapiens, your Sapien will own its own clothing token. So your t-shirts, your hats, your backgrounds, any kind of equipable item, your Sapien owns in its own token bound account. And so those things exist as tokens that your Sapiens owns. And then you can use some of the experiences we built to change the artwork of your Sapien based on the tokens you own in the account. And so you kind of view the experience through the lens of this token, as if you're experiencing things as your token, you're doing things as your token, is kind of the way that we've built this experience out. And we think that will expand to other applications as well, where the experience will kind of be blurred. It's not so much you as a wallet holder, you as an individual, you as a human interacting with it. It's you as an individual can interact with an application through the lens of your NFT, through kind of like the puppet master, like you controlling your NFT, you interacting with your NFT. And so some ways that could look like is, when you go to connect your wallet on an application, instead of just connecting wallets, it'll be connect NFT. And you're actually connecting as your NFT and experiencing the application as your NFT, using the application as your NFT. There'll be entire, systems built around this concept of your NFT is the primary user. And NFTs are the primary way that you interact with this system. And so we think that's super interesting.
So yeah, I think like the dumbed down way I've been thinking about it is like, what if you have a folder and you have a whole bunch of files in that folder, and you have to sort of imagine a bit more than that, of course, because the user interfaces probably change depending on which folder you're in. So the OS might have a lot more flexibility in the types of things you can go do. But in large part, people will probably still interact through your MetaMask or through your Rainbow. But that next level of interaction, how you're selecting which NFT to engage with through which dApp, or how that entire user experience might change even in these wallets, is probably a place that hasn't been super explored, but is probably intriguing.
Yeah. And we've seen explorations like that in other places, right? Like you have this concept of playing a game as a character. right? You're not playing the game as me, Jayden the human. I'm playing the game as my character, and my character has its own identity, its own rules, its own experience points, its own inventory. And so I don't play the game as Jayden the human. I play the game as my character. And we think that same model applies to NFTs, right? Your NFT is really its own identity. It can be its own identity. What happens when we start building experiences around it? There are other places in the world where we're used to interacting using an identity that's different from my identity, right? Like my Twitter handle is different than my identity. I could have 10 Twitter handles or 100 that I use. And I'm interacting with the app as a Twitter handle, not necessarily as Jayden the person. And so we think NFTs have that same quality of being their own identities.
Yeah, I think one of the concepts that sparked new thinking for me here was this idea of, let's just say, a CryptoPunk owning a lens profile and the social graph that sort of emerges around that CryptoPunk. So, zoom back in time before G-Money doxed himself, the asset that he's built, or this identity he's built around that very noticeable punk, there was still a whole bunch of that identity that was, it's spread throughout YouTube or through Twitter or through these other different places. But now you're able to kind of bundle that up, assuming that your ENS domain, your Lens account, your Farcaster account, your Glass account, whatever, all these sort of things can be bundled up and owned by that one asset. And so maybe that's, interesting from like an idea of like these digital influencers, and that becomes, a brand or even more like a company, and it probably could trade at some point or be fractionalized. I mean, there's like a whole lot of weird things you could go do down that path. But then also you can, I think one of the more interesting angles for NFTs is looking at an NFT as a base unit of ownership in, let's just think of smart contracts as vending machines, and an NFT owning multiple vending machines on the internet and having that thing now easily transferred, right? So I can send ownership of this entire world or series of worlds that are all represented in one NFT to an acquirer or to somebody who I'm passing it down to, or to even just to a different, address that maybe I want to reduce my online exposure to crazy phishing attacks. I don't know. I think the more I go down that path, the more I start to, and we're not even talking about layering on top of these sort of autonomous agents and AI, and I mean, the weirdness is just going to compound. So to me, that was a big switch. I was like, okay, pure simple functionality that allows me to bundle these things together, and these things together are more valuable because they are now essentially liquid, or more valuable because they are the constitution of their parts.
Yeah, it essentially makes non-fungible tokens more non-fungible. And I think that's a thread that we've been really digging deep into. Right now we're experiencing within the NFT ecosystem an extreme hyper speculation moment, right? Or the blur effect, where like it's not even about the artwork, it's like a commodity. We don't even, the picture is so small you can't even see what's in it, but it doesn't matter because you can sweep the floor, you can lend it, you can buy now pay later, do all these things. But for us, we feel that's counter to what NFTs are meant to be. They were meant to be non-fungible. They're meant to be an accumulation of your friendships and reputation, art, collectibles. It's supposed to be hard to trade it, and not too liquid. And it's supposed to bring people together, the human aspects of it, right? We've already seen the effects of this hyper speculation where creators are the ones who get hit the most, right? Without the royalties. We see that creativity gets hurt because then it kind of spawns this nature of like launching more meme projects and not really caring about what are NFTs supposed to be, right? And so I think for us, it's like we're bringing fun back to non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and we're making them a lot more complicated, a lot more complex, and you can fill them up with awesome things. And so that way, you don't really just have that one singular metric of floor price as the indicator of like the success or the awesomeness of an NFT, right?
It's the leasehold improvements on a piece of real estate that in like the big art REIT or something like that is just a line item. But for the brewery or the craft worker, the exposed beams matter a lot. And yeah, there's like a lot more nuance there that I think is interesting. So, a big theme I see, and I laugh at these sometimes, but you have these one-liner, putting the fun back in non-fungibles. Like, I know you have a T-shirt. Like, you've made a T-shirt that says that already. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
or stickers, right?
I think I have one.
We have stickers. And folks, for listening, like, or you're probably watching it right now, these guys are not in uniform right now. If they're in uniform, they'd be wearing a pair of overalls that they've manufactured to look like they actually work with paint in some sense, even though they're clearly just digital artists. But, respect to the hustle. Right now, they've got their non-business attire on, so they look like I think Benny's even got a collar shirt on. But I love the memification. I think this consumer product angle is obviously something that we care about a lot at Seed Club, and I think we're going to start to see these new interesting applications of it. Obviously, your Twitter feed is just like a retweet heaven of the interesting people that are doing stuff there. But I know one of the things that you are very interested in is the metaverse, because you love it so deeply. You think the current status of the metaverse is perfectly amazing and compelling, and you just want to see more adoption in the existing. I can't even keep a straight face right now. You hate it. You don't like it. You think there's a lot to be improved there, and I think you have a plan to do so.
Yeah. So when I did like 50 talks around the world in 2018, there were two topics. One was NFTs and the other was metaverses. And I was like, yo, the metaverse is the future, man. This is the greatest thing ever. You all read Snow Crash, all of that. And everyone just looked at me like, what's this guy talking about? And then somewhere along the line, I remember Matthew Ball, he had a whole essays, and the whole thesis was, hey, look at Fortnite. Kids hang out there. That means the metaverse is real. People want to hang out there. Look, the kids are on Roblox. Like, look, this is the future. And now, like 6 years later, now that I look at it, I really think honestly, it was incorrect, because like, think about it. As kids, we played games, I think, right? Like for me, I played StarCraft. I played Maple Story. I skipped dinner, like I skipped activities outdoors, but no one really said, oh yeah, just because Benny plays games, that he would want to live in Blizzardverse or Call of Duty world, or wants to like sign his life away to Maple Story land, right? I just wanted to play games because I was a kid and I was having fun. And so I think the metrics got skewed in a way where it was like, no, people want to hang out in these game worlds and not actually play a game. They just want to hang out. And then they reference Second Life, all these other things that kind of have interesting data points but are not fully accurate. And what spawned in the last few years is metaverse companies left, right, center coming out of the ears. Like everyone's like, the one that really pushed me over the edge, and I must say this, is the Juicyverse from Starburst to Candy that just came out like, I don't know, a week ago. And I couldn't hold it anymore. It was almost like, is this the comedy world that we're living in? So my whole point with it is like, nobody hangs out in the metaverse. A metaverse is a overly complicated social consumer app that has some graphic engine, and then it's all about latency and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if you guys have never built a social consumer app, number one, it's working hard. Number two, it has principles like network effects and users. And like if Clubhouse, whom had the most amount of funding in the recent times, kind of struggled. I don't know what kind of 3D virtual VR, AR, whatever latency thing you got for the metaverse. You still have the same problem as a social app, which is an empty room problem or an empty world problem. And so that's kind of been the whole thread for us. It's like these worlds are, yeah, maybe they're kind of cool. You could call them metaverse or autonomous world or digital world or whatever, or website. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have any users. Like, people don't hang out there. And I've tried. Like, honestly, I've tried hanging out on Cyber, all these other places. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? Like, after 3 minutes of like, wow, I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm going back to Twitter. So I think that this is the big problem in this space, is it's an empty world problem. And one of the reasons for token bound account, if we're building on like this like knowledge stack that we're going down, or this rabbit hole, is populating these empty worlds. And we already know how to, because video games or MMOs for the last, 30, 40 years, they knew how to solve this. They have NPCs there, right? They have bots. They have NPC characters that give you storylines, give you quests, and they kind of make you feel like this world is alive. And it kind of gives you meaning to maybe your life. You're learning something along the way. So for us, we kind of see NPCs as the future, except we call it networked playable characters. And that's like the eventual end state for NFTs, where you have an NFT that has an Ethereum identity, and that has some sort of AI that can perform on-chain actions. Maybe it has a Twitter account where it shitposts using GPT-4 or something like that. And then it becomes like its own thing, right? That you might own or might not own. And they populate these empty worlds. And so that it gives kind of more liveliness to these worlds. So that's kind of the thread that we've been exploring.
I think our intuitions around how AI will impact these types of worlds, and whether that's Twitter, or the internet generally, or something like, I want to dive into what Parallel's building here because I think it's a good example. It makes this a bit more real. I think our intuitions are really challenged by this. So I both see what you're saying and I'm intrigued by it, and also see a whole bunch of other challenges that emerge. And I think the one piece that we continue to forget, in a world where AI actors exist, it's most likely that they will be interacting with other AI actors, or that I will be in there with my other AI actors. And then AI actors aren't limited by physics. I mean, obviously we are, but in the same way that we are in the real world, don't have to be in the same place. And they're not limited by attention, right? And that we have to sleep. And so there's a limited amount of attention. So I think those, we know that when you put a zero in an equation, all of a sudden it just screws up the output fairly significantly. And I don't think we're fully clear on what that output is going to look like in these different things. So when I think about what Parallel is working on, that from their research forum, they're talking about that they created and modified the Google Stanford paper, so an LLM. They made a 2D real-time game that sits somewhere between playable and a Tamagotchi. We like that. It's kind of interesting. They plan on using 6551 so they can have a wallet to use Prime, their currency, and assets to do things with each other. These AIs can purchase, invest, trade, and more on their own. So they're out there trying to maximize something. You can talk to and influence your AI. So there's this idea of human input to help learn, and maybe you're a godlike figure or a dad-like figure or a mom-like figure, and some sort of visualization of this. And pretty basic right now, but I think it's super interesting to think about what that might result in. And then also, I just guarantee you there are a dozen unexpected things that are going to emerge from that, any one of which might make this a completely useless endeavor.
The show Westworld will become reality.
That's not a great thing. You've watched season 3 of this, right?
Watch it on season 2, so maybe I should watch season 3 and then take
I think you see where it's going. But it's more of what Parallel's doing here, what you envision. Because I guess the pushback that you had around the metaverse is one that there's sort of like an uninspired version of it where it's like, hey, people are just going to show up and hang out and that'll be cool. And Juicyverse, my man, you got to get the t-shirt for this. Like, I feel like you should do it. Like, can you have, I know you have Capri Suns at a lot of your events. So I think Starburst at your next event is a must. If I show up and it's not there, I'm going to be super disappointed.
You should do one better, Capri Sunburst.
See, now that's what we're talking about. We can have the Capri Sun NFT own the Starburst world NFTs. But I think, the more evolved version, or at least an experienced version of the metaverse is what we're doing right now. It's the Zoom, it's the Twitter, it's like these internet lives that we've sort of built. And I think, taking even this idea of NPCs out of a specific game world and onto the internet more generally, I think is when you start to get some, again, really interesting ideas that can kind of emerge there. And you see it already in whether they're bots that are trading crypto, or, there's little Michaela as a digital influencer. And so these are maybe nascent or very new, very early versions of components that might be bundled up into these new types of characters.
Yeah, what I find interesting, Elon just had an interview a few days ago of CNN about OpenAI. And I tweeted about this. Like, this is the first time I heard in his conversation, he was like, yeah, I'm a speciesist. I can't even say that word. And he said Larry Page was a machinist or something, where like basically Elon believes in humanity and humans, that we're capable of many great things. And I guess in his interview, Larry Page is the machinist who believes machines should have power or something, right? So I guess it just comes down to a philosophical exploration, right? It is a reality that already exists. In the internet, we're surrounded by bots. We just don't know it, right? The internet could be used for bad. It can be used for good. Blockchain can be used for bad and for good. And so is it a reality that was already surrounded us, but now it's coming into full vision? Like, we can see it. We can see all the pieces come. Are NPCs good or bad? Can they be used for good and bad? I think there will be a whole, if you guys all come to NPC Day, which is the conference that we're going to set up, we're going to have definitely a topic about NPC ethics. I think that's a really important one, right? But I think that it's important that, yes, we have excitement for this future, but we're also a little bit afraid as well of what happens when you release on-chain NFTs to do things, to do MEV, and to like, what if they start spiraling into like rogue actors, right? And start like performing hacks on like protocols and stuff, right? And then tweeting about it. I mean, this does happen already, but it just becomes more into fruition, right? So it's a good question. I don't have a easy answer. I don't know if Jayden has more to add, but yeah, it's complicated, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think much more to add on my side, other than this is, the 10,000 foot view of NPCs and virtual worlds and everything is, a crazy future that's enabled by a really small thing, right? 6551 is a really small thing that we're just giving every NFT a wallet. It's a very simple, like the entire proposal is a couple hundred words. It's a very simple mechanic. It's not really anything new. It's not like these ideas haven't existed. It's not like this concept of NFTs doing and owning things hasn't been possible before. It's just, what if we took that to its nth degree and then tried to like build the groundwork that allows us to build up to these crazy futures? And that's really kind of our goal, is like, we have these crazy visions of the future of like what NPCs could look like, what NFTs could be, what it looks like to be an agent on chain. And that's enabled by a really simple thing. Let's just give every NFT a wallet.
I think that's a good point to touch on, because as I dive into some of the tweets, there's a bunch of reply guys in these tweets saying that this isn't new, right? This has been done before. Many will link to one of, maybe a half dozen other projects that have, that they would say have done this idea of NFTs owning other things. And so what is your answer to that? Like, why is what you're doing different and new and novel?
Yeah. So the first thing is, EIPs aren't necessarily meant to be a claim of invention or a claim of this is a new thing, right? We're not claiming that we invented the idea of NFTs owning things, or that we invented anything really. All we're saying is, hey, we think this is a really valuable pattern that can bring a lot of really cool experiences to life if we as a community gather around and start building using this pattern. That's kind of the same thing with 721 back in the day, right? Like, everybody was building these like crazy, like, oh, what if we had like ERC-20 tokens, but they were like, everyone was different. Everybody was building their own kind of standards. Some people had their own like, proprietary things that they were building. Some people were trying to build an open source. And eventually 721, everybody kind of got together and was like, okay, we think this idea of non-fungible tokens is important. We think everybody should be able to build on this. We think an ecosystem should be able to build up around this. Let's come to some consensus on how these should look, how these should work. Everybody can kind of use the same interface, the same way of building things. And, nobody there was saying like, hey, like, we invented the idea of a non-fungible token. They were saying like, hey, we should all gather together as a community around this idea of non-fungible tokens so that everybody can build on top of it. So that's what we're doing with 6551. We want to see the community converge around this idea of NFTs having wallets, because we think that's really important. But other people have had other things, like, kitty hats was one of the early explorations of NFTs owning things. Dan, who's now at OpenSea, had this Chrome, is like a Chrome extension. You could like equip hats onto your CryptoKitty and you could own the hats as like tokens. Other things have come from there. ERC-998, it was one of the early explorations of this, where NFTs could own ERC-20 tokens and other NFTs. Avagachi built on top of ERC-998, as far as I'm aware. There's been some other more newer things, other newer proposals, but really, like, the reason we think there's room for a proposal here, the reason that we even went through all the hassle of setting this up as a proposal in the first place, because I think there's a couple of things that are really important if this is going to be the future, if NFTs having wallets is going to be a thing. First, it should work with every NFT. It's not just some NFTs should have this. It's not just like new NFTs that you write some custom stuff into your smart contract and every NFT of your collection has a wallet. It shouldn't just be limited to new NFTs. It should be every NFT. Old ones, new ones, doesn't matter. Every NFT should be able to take advantage of this. The second one was a lot of these kind of ownership things. They write a lot of code into the ERC-721 contract. So they extend the ERC-721 standard. That means like you add all these extra methods, all this extra functionality to your NFT contract that allows this concept of NFTs owning things. Not only does that mean it only works with new NFTs that are built, it also means it only works with some assets, right? If your NFT contract only supports owning other ERC-721s, but doesn't support ERC-20s or ERC-1155, you're kind of like kneecapped, right? Your NFT can only do so much, can only own so much. And that's just the ownership aspect, right? Doesn't really cover the NFTs doing things. And so we think this idea of NFTs having a wallet is really important, because wallets are the universal communication layer on chain. They're the universal interaction layer. Wallets are the things that own assets. Wallets are the things that interact with applications. And so giving NFTs a wallet means that NFTs are just compatible out of the box with every other type of token. NFTs can own anything. NFTs can do anything. That concept of a fully self-sovereign wallet for every NFT is really important, because anything short of that, you're just limiting what an NFT can do. And the final, we have a whole thing. We did a talk at Ethalism where we laid out some of these design considerations that we had. The final one was it should be fully decentralized, fully open source, fully public good. And so what 6551 does, it specifies a single registry, one smart contract that can be deployed on any EVM compatible chain by anybody. If the 6551 registry doesn't exist on your favorite blockchain, you can go out there. You don't need our permission. You don't need anybody's permission. You can go and deploy that contract at the same address on your favorite chain and just start using 6551 out of the box. And that means that nobody owns that registry. It's a public good. Every NFT can take advantage of it. Every chain can take advantage of it. Anybody can use it. And you don't have to worry about interacting with somebody's proprietary, upgradable, centralized contract. You can just build on top of this assumption that every NFT is a wallet. And it does so through this decentralized proposal.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's interesting to look back and see how, it's a mixer of new innovation and narratives and sort of emerging use cases at the right time sort of creates the history, I think, that we kind of look back on. And so kind of fun to be talking about it both, in the moment and I guess looking ahead at what might sort of emerge, and then also looking back to the roots of these things, which I think are going to look very quaint in the next couple of years as CryptoKitties. I mean, it was such a thing, and it also kind of looks quaint right now, which is kind of wild to think about, especially if you were around back in the day when the network was clogged and it was all Benny's fault. Was part of your fault, Benny? You had a bit of...
CryptoKitties are coming back.
Not financial advice.
FYI.
All right, guys. Well, we're coming up on time here. I appreciated you sharing both the strategic sort of vision for this. I think that was super interesting, and also where 6551 might go. I think there's a lot of consumer product builders in our community that I know are watching this and are looking for new ways of building experiences for people that might reduce some of the complexities in managing your accounts and assets all the way through to unlocking new types of things. So I would love for you guys just both to give me one idea that you're excited about seeing, whether it's the weirdest or one that you think might have the most impact that's emerging from this ecosystem that you're co-creating.
There's one idea that is called APT Film. It's a project that we started somewhere, but probably will finish it next year. The idea is to replace Kodak and Fujifilm in the analog film roll business. Instead, we see there's a future of digital film rolls, and using 6551 photo NFTs nested inside of a digital film roll. I've been minting actually photos NFTs for a little while now. If anyone checks out my wallet of like Google Meet hangouts or even in person, and that's actually been like alpha test of this idea of digital film rolls. So I think that to me is the most exciting APT film project that we've got going on. But yeah, Jayden?
I'm really excited for the day that I can just log into an app as my NFT and do things. Like I picture this world where I go in and I'm scrolling, mint.fun or Zora, and, collecting these things or kind of curating these things that I think are cool. And I'm doing it as my NFT. Like it's just a seamless, like I just log in as my NFT. The app assumes that that's the case. It's just like a part of my native experience on Ethereum is using my NFT to do things. It's something that just fades into the background. It's not even something that is like front of mind, or the experience is something that's, specifically like the draw of that experience is that I'm doing it as my NFT. It's just something that's just a part of my experience. Interacting with Ethereum is interacting as my NFT. So I'm kind of excited for it to be less of a front of mind thing and more of a back of mind thing.
Thanks, gentlemen. Lovely to chat with you, and very interested in seeing, well, Benny, what you yell about next on the internet. I think I follow that closely, and to see what comes out of the community.
Hello, friends. Steph here, Media Team Steward at Seed Club. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review Building at the Edges. This helps other Web3 builders discover these valuable insights. And tell us what you think on Twitter. Tag us at SeedClubHQ. Thanks for listening. See you on the internet.